I just don't come on here and repeat things I read on websites and the newspapers. Some of them deserve to be addressed, but just not repeated. I mean, why give voice almost word for something that you've already read? I'm a thinker, and if you're listening to this program, you're a thinker. That's a big difference. That's a big difference. We think these things through. I told you what I do during the weekends and at nights and so forth and so on. And we're going to walk through this further because I'm not done. According to the Supreme Court, the Appointments Clause is an absolutely critical feature of the separation of powers and presidential power. In other words, the Senate has to have a role, and an inferior executive branch appointee, like a deputy attorney general, cannot usurp the power of the president, the elected president, who is his boss, by making an appointment that violates the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. And in this case, the reason it does is because Mr. Mueller, in exercising the power he's exercising, is way beyond the kind of power that an inferior officer would exercise. Now, I'm going to get into that in more detail. Some people say, what about Ken Starr? Happy to oblige. We'll be right back.
Mark Levin, making conservatism great again. Dial in now, 877-381-3811.
Scalia said in part, in the context of a clause, the Appointments Clause, designed to preserve political accountability relative to important government assignments, we think it evident that inferior officers, that is, people who do not get nominated and confirmed by the Senate, are officers whose work is directed and supervised at some level by others who were appointed by presidential nomination with the advice and consent of the Senate. This understanding of the Appointments Clause conforms with the views of the first Congress. On July 27, 1789, Congress established the first executive department, the Department of Foreign Affairs. And in so doing, it expressly designated the Secretary of the Department as a principal officer and his subordinate, the Chief Clerk of the Department, as an inferior officer. And by the way, the Department of Justice wasn't created in the Constitution. I believe it was created in the 1840s or thereabouts. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is by design not supervising and directing the work, the actual work that Robert Mueller's doing. So Mueller can't be an inferior officer under the Scalia test in Edmund versus United States. Now, let me sum it up this way. Or better yet, let me point out what Calabresi points out. Mueller is not an inferior officer under Scalia's test of officer inferiority, because Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is not supervising and directing Mueller's work, but is rubber stamping it. Mueller is in effect and in practice exercising the powers of a principal officer, even though he has not been nominated by the President or confirmed by the Senate. Mueller is also not an inferior officer under the late Chief Justice Rehnquist test, in his majority opinion in this Morrison versus Olson opinion in 1988. Two of the reasons the Supreme Court gave for finding Alexa Morrison, the independent counsel at that point, to be an inferior officer were that, number one, she was empowered to perform only certain limited duties, and two, she had limited jurisdiction. On the facts of the case, Chief Justice Rehnquist concluded at the end of his opinion that the statute which authorized Morrison's appointment, which has since sunsetted out of existence, did not interfere too much with presidential power to control the executive branch. Now, this conclusion seems defensible on the facts of that case. Only one government official, Ted Olson, was prosecuted, which was the unlawful withholding of documents from Congress, and by the way, an outrageous prosecution. Now, at the time the prosecution was brought, Ted Olson had left public office and was a private citizen. This was a case where the special counsel was, one, performing only certain limited duties, and two, had only limited jurisdiction. Accordingly, the Supreme Court was probably right in concluding that on the facts of the Morrison case, the special counsel was not interfering too much on presidential power. I disagree with that, but that's fine. In Mueller's case, however, Mueller is investigating whether the sitting president of the United States obstructed justice by firing Mueller's longtime friend Jim Comey to conceal collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia into the 2016 presidential election. Instead of pursuing only one person on a limited matter, Mueller has, without any real supervision by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, indicted Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, on 2 counts of misconduct having nothing to do with collusion with Russia, indicted and accepted a plea bargain from Michael Flynn, Trump's former NSA advisor, for the crime of lying to government officials, an offense which Comey's guilty of and for which he's not been prosecuted, by the way. Obtained a similarly dubious plea bargain with former Trump campaign official George Papadopoulos, indicting 13 Russian citizens and 3 Russian business entities, a decision which has major foreign policy consequences. Prosecuted Richard Pinedo and Dutch attorney Alex van der Zwaan, subpoenaed numerous additional people, wiretapped calls covered by, that is, wiretap for phone numbers, attorney-client privilege by the president's longtime personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, and referred information illegally obtained, one might argue, to the office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. But even if it wasn't illegally obtained, we're talking about the wide breadth of this investigation. Mueller's investigation, whether he admits it or not, of course, has made controlled leaks of information to the press designed to embarrass the president and hinder him in the performance of his duties. And his investigation has dominated the headlines for over a year now, distracting the president from performing his job and making Mueller far more powerful and well-known than any of the United States attorneys, all of whom are considered principal officers nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Mueller's work is not being supervised and controlled by principal officer Rod Rosenstein. He rubber stamps it. This investigation is not limited in scope or jurisdiction. To the contrary, Mueller's investigation is breathtaking in scope. His indictment of Russian citizens and business entities interferes with the president's ability to control foreign policy with Russia. And it goes on. And there's no question at all that Mueller has behaved over the past year as if he were a principal officer of the United States. Even though he has never been nominated by the president or confirmed by the Senate. And I would add, to underscore Calabresi's point, he's built an office like a U.S. attorney. He's got, I think, 17, effectively, assistant special counsel. He is best analogized to a U.S. attorney and not to an assistant U.S. attorney. So even Mueller, who has a boss and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, is not an inferior officer in any meaningful way. Now, what he means by that is we have over 90 United States attorneys. And they all, at least theoretically, report to Main Justice. They all theoretically report to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, who usually handles the criminal side of the Justice Department. So the fact that Mueller reports, theoretically at least, to Rosenstein doesn't mean he's an inferior officer at all. Just like the U.S. attorneys are not inferior officers. While Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is a principal officer and could take actions against Mueller, he cannot delegate his principal officer status to Mueller any more or any way that Donald Trump could delegate his power to veto legislation to Mueller. In other words, Mueller doesn't have the power to delegate the kind of authority Rosenstein does not have the kind of power to delegate the kind of authority to Mueller that he's delegated. He doesn't have that power. He does not have this power to step in the shoes of the President of the United States and then to step into the shoes of all the United States senators. Rosenstein does not have that power. And so Calabresi concludes, as do I. Calabresi concludes, as do I, that Mueller's appointment is unconstitutional. Everything that flows from it, the fruit of the poisonous tree, the plea agreements, the subpoenas, the indictments, are all null and void. So, how do you test this? People have commented, well, okay, we'll get rid of them. It doesn't work that way now, does it? Every defendant in this case, Manafort's lawyers, Flynn's lawyers, Gates' lawyers, Papadopoulos' lawyers, all of them, should be raising this issue with every court before which they're required to appear. Now, what about the Ken Starr case, where he investigated a whole bunch of stuff that was handed to him by Attorney General Janet Reno? He didn't do it on his own. She kept throwing these issues to him because she didn't want to appoint another independent counsel. Ken Starr was appointed under a federal statute, the independent counsel statute. I never thought it was constitutional, but 8 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices did, and Scalia was the one dissent in Morrison versus Olson, the Ted Olson case. There are all kinds of levels of oversight on Ken Starr. There was a special court that was set up, a special court for the division of the independent counsel that had 3 judges on it. I know because I litigated in front of that court in the Iran-Contra matter, and it was a secret court. If we had an issue, say in the Iran-Contra matter with the independent counsel Lawrence Walsh, I could bring the matter before that court. And of course the attorneys general, whether it was in the Ken Starr case or the case involving Walsh, had a procedure, a statutory procedure that they would be required to go through in order to remove them. So even though they exercised this kind of enormous power, and for the purposes of the Morrison versus Olson case were said to be inferior officials, there are no such checks on Mr. Mueller. There's no special division court for this special counsel. He doesn't exist by a matter of statute. He exists by a matter of Department of Justice regulation. His initial appointment did involve specific statutes, criminal statutes, as we have discussed, so I'm blue in the face. It was a very broad appointment. And his appointment since then has even broadened, even further. It's more broad than it was before, broader, I should say. Moreover, when you look at the 49 areas of the questions that Mr. Mueller wanted to pose to the President of the United States, why did you fire Mr. Comey? Why didn't you like my appointment? What did you say to Jeff Sessions and so forth? This is exactly the kind of power, by the way, illegitimate, but exactly the kind of power that is supposed to be controlled and limited. But it isn't controlled and limited. Not by the Deputy Attorney General, and the Attorney General has recused himself. So I think a very strong argument could be made, and ought to be made, by all the defendants in this case, all the witnesses who do not wish to be witnesses anymore, all the individuals receiving subpoenas who do not wish to respond to subpoenas, all the people who've been notified that they're subjects or even targets of this investigation should walk into the respective federal district court and make the case that the appointment of Mr. Mueller is unconstitutional under the Appointments Clause. We know the handful of cases that these judges will look at. It'll all depend on whether the judge is fair or a leftist, quite frankly. But you still make your point. You still make your case. Manafort's lawyers will amend their arguments to Judge Ellis. And the others should too. Make the case. And I would even go further than my friend Calabresi. There's nothing Mr. Mueller's doing in terms of the prosecution of Manafort, what he did with Flynn, what he's done with Papadopoulos, what he's done with Gates, that a normal U.S. attorney couldn't handle. That a normal U.S. attorney has to be nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. So 2 points. Half or much of what Mr. Mueller's doing is the work of the United States Attorney's Office, which underscores the point that he is a principal officer. The other half of what Mueller's doing, chasing the President of the United States with these broad inquiries, broad areas, underscores even further that he's not an inferior employee. An assistant United States attorney could no way do what Mueller's doing. No way. In fact, in many respects, a United States attorney couldn't do what Mueller's doing. Man, I wish I were involved making these cases. I really do. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
We try to move the ball here, folks. We don't try to play ping pong with ourselves. You know, good news, folks. Hillsdale College is offering their free online Constitution 101 course again, but only for a limited time. So register right away at levinforhillsdale.com. Hillsdale is the authority on teaching the Constitution, and you can take the course based on the same curriculum that Hillsdale students use, taught by the same amazing professors. Choose to 1 million people have registered. Close to 1 million people have registered. And if you haven't, you should. I know this research I'm about to share with you doesn't apply to you, my listeners, but 1 in 3 Americans can't name a single right protected by the First Amendment. I think most of them are in Congress, by the way. The First Amendment, and only 25% can name all 3 branches of government. But get this, 33% can't name any branch, not even one. So you know what? We need to help make sure that our fellow Americans understand not just these facts, but our constitutional rights, too. Each one of us has a responsibility here, for our own sakes and the nation's sake. Constitution 101 provides you the perfect overview. So register at levinforhillsdale.com. You'll even get a free pocket Constitution just for signing up. You have to know liberty to defend liberty. And that's what Hillsdale College is all about. levinforhillsdale.com. That's Levin for Hillsdale.com. Now, let's see here. Oh, perfect. I think I lost my... All right, Mr. Producer. Do we have a really good caller out there, do you think? We don't? We have a bunch of calls. The board's full. Oh, Mr. Producer's tougher than I am. Sirius Satellite, John in South Carolina. Prove Mr. Producer wrong. Go.
Yes, Mark. I need to know, what is the statute of limitations on this endless list of crimes? And also...
Well, hold on. What crimes?
Well, you've got obstruction of justice, destroying evidence.
Of whom? Who are we talking about?
The Mueller case, the Hillary case.
Okay, sir, are you saying Hillary's case where they destroyed documents? The Mueller case where he didn't destroy documents? He's the prosecutor. What are you talking about?
The Hillary case.
Yeah.
But, do you have any...
I think the statute of limitations is probably 5 years. I'd have to look up each issue, but my guess is time is running out.
Well, that's given us an explanation there of why they're dragging the clock down, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And the other question I have for you, sir, is that Jeff Sessions, something's amiss here.
What do you want me to do? Every night people call about Jeff Sessions. I've already said what I have to say about Jeff Sessions. It's like kicking a dog all the time. What do you want me to say?
Well, it doesn't make sense, Mark.
I know, but what do you want me to say? I already said he should step down. He's way too passive in the face of all these violations. That's my opinion. But he's not going to step down.
I'm sorry.
He's not stepping down. There's nothing I can do about it. It's like people posting now, okay, Mark, great, the appointment's closed. What are you going to do about it? I can't do anything about it. I'm not a litigator in this case. I don't represent any of the defendants. It's some people, really, a talk show host is that powerful? I'm making the case. So the lawyers out there who actually have involved in the case, whose clients have standing, so the president and his lawyers in the case who have standing, so the people at the Justice Department who have official positions can hear what I say. I can't, hey, Mark's here, you know what? You're fired, and you're this, and you're that. All right, sir, thank you for your call. I'm trying to give the arguments that can be used, like now the president's lawyers understand. According to the Department of Justice, he can't be indicted. The Constitution helps him. The Department of Justice rules help him. Or early on, March 2017, laying out as best I could the case cobbled together in the media on why there was spying, there was espionage going on, domestic political espionage. I called it police state tactics. I talked about a silent coup, went into it at great length. I can't stop it. I can talk about it and lay it out there for members of Congress and other people to know about it. And, of course, on Thursday, when I said the President of the United States, at some point, should have a U.S. attorney investigate the spies, the FISA activities, and all the rest, the President did even better. He didn't wait. And he directed the Justice Department to do it, for which he's very courageous and deserves kudos. More when I return.